Hi friends, it's Carl here again with Calm Survival, and I want to talk a little bit today about the basics of planning and a little bit more of the philosophy behind it. We need to break things down beyond just what to do. You can know what to do, but if you don't know why you're doing it, it's not going to be as effective. And if you know why you're doing something, you can figure out a lot more things on your own. Presumably, you're at least reasonably intelligent and have some life experience. And I find that often advice is given without recognizing that fact. So I'm not in any of my videos going to tell you the definitive way to do something, but I want to give always the background. I always want to be looking for where I can add a broader context to something that you may already have in your toolkit, something you can already apply. You may just not realize it yet. So why do we put together an emergency plan? An emergency plan is obviously more than just one thing. We have to plan for more than just one event. We have to try to predict things that are somewhat unpredictable. But I think, at least for me, it comes to a few key details. One, it gives us a sense of comfort. Often by looking forward and looking at a potential problem, looking at a crisis, we can then plan, we can adapt, and then we know that we're a little bit more ready. Now, if we accept that we're never going to be 100%, then we're always leaving ourselves room to improvise and adapt, but we have a framework for the decisions that we need to make. I find that a bit more comforting knowing that I already have a solid part of a plan. Now, when people think about having part of a plan, I guess you could say that there's two ways to look at it. There's the solidness of the structure and the completeness of the structure. I think too many people focus on the completeness. If I know my plan is not complete, but I know that the pieces I have are solid, I know what I have to work from. This also gives us a perspective in understanding what our actual capabilities are. You might end up in a situation where it's not just you involved, it's your neighbors, it's your community, but because you have a plan in place, you know what resources you have to offer to other people. There's a writer whose name is Cory Doctorow, and he's been recently speaking and writing a lot about being a covered dish person. Basically, the idea is when you approach somebody in a crisis, you go visit your neighbor, you can have a covered dish or a shotgun. And it becomes a bit of a prisoner's dilemma because they can either share a covered dish or a shotgun. And if they think that you're just going to arrive with a shotgun, there's no benefit for them to share the covered dish. And it becomes very difficult when we are in crisis to look at our surpluses. We almost always have a surplus of something. Maybe it's just time, talent, strength of muscle. Maybe it's life experience. Maybe it's something else. And so by having a plan, we can more rapidly identify what do I have in surplus? What can I give? And that assists the people around us, even if they're in our space, even if they are in our family, it helps them to find their surpluses. Now, when we're making a plan, we always want to start with the end in mind. If we take an endpoint goal, even if we know that it's not the definitive endpoint, but we have a goal, then we can base our decisions, we can base them in time, and we can base that plan out. So something like water, our end goal is to have a continued supply of water. Well, that means I can make a plan for the first day. I can make a second plan that gets me through the first 5 days, and then I can build a plan that gets me to that self-sufficiency. Ideally, in that time frame, crisis, averts, things go back to normal. But if we just start with plan of I need water, and we don't give ourselves a goalpost, an endpoint, it becomes too big of a task. It becomes climbing Mount Everest instead of a small hill. So we've got to make sure that we're breaking these things down into reasonable sizes, width of the topic and the duration. We've all seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We've all seen it. We've all seen that pyramid. But I think that often we don't recognize that, or it's not explained, that it also comes with a time frame. Yes, the bottom row, those initial needs, are things that we don't do well with if we don't have. But we don't do well very, very quickly. The top of that peak isn't just a nice to have. We need to recognize that we are going to have to get ourselves to a place where we're meeting all of those needs. We can push some of them back for a short period of time, but not for a very long period of time. As I record this in the beginning of June 2020, a lot of people have realized that the long-term crisis that has played out didn't allow them a chance to get back to the top of that peak of that hierarchy of needs. And the people that have done really well are people who recognized that they needed to re-achieve that. They needed to get back to that self-actualization and things like that. So it's important for us to remember in our time frame, when we're making our plan, we need to adjust for that. We need to just make sure we're keeping that in mind. One of the other big factors with this planning is using the time that we have available and having a bit of perspective on what it is that we are trying to achieve from the point of view of what goals are reasonable. Someone like me, who's a big chunk of whose career has really dealt with a lot of these little nitty-gritty logistical planning things, I have a lot of experience in quickly adapting, changing those plans, finding the key details. It's something I've done, and it's something I've done on someone else's time. Look at the skills you already have, the abilities you already have, leverage those, but also understand that this doesn't come easy. These are the sorts of things that people who are good at it have probably spent a big chunk of their life doing. When I was very small, my family spent a short period of time in Papua New Guinea. And when we first arrived, one of the other families that was there, one of the people we were living near, was running through the routine with my mom, just kind of explaining to her how the community worked, how the basic running of things happened. And one of the things that they mentioned was, if you need help with menu planning, just let me know. We only grocery shop once a week. And my mom replied with, every week? And that took the other person back a bit. See, we lived on a farm where grocery shopping every week was our luxury, as in that was a thing we did, and that routine wasn't broken up very often, but there was always the chance that that could be taken, like that could stop being a thing. And I remember several times growing up where roads got closed and all of a sudden a weekly shopping trip went to 2 weeks, sometimes went to 3 weeks. And that's fine because we knew that was part of the plan. But both of my parents had spent their entire lives under that sort of thought process. It was just baked into the way they thought. To expect somebody to go from an on-demand lifestyle to planning for 2 weeks of groceries, 3 weeks of groceries, I think it's a bit much. So we need to make sure that we're setting our own expectations of our own selves within a reasonable set of parameters. This is all a team effort. The more people that we have around us that can not just help us, but that we can help, the easier this all goes. Part of me doing this is me learning a new method of teaching, how to explain things in a different way than I have before. Hopefully, if you're watching this, you might be able to use some of the videos that I've produced to help educate other people around you. Maybe that gives you an idea to help break something down so that something isn't as scary for someone else. Anyways, hopefully that gives a bit more idea and background on the basic philosophy of what we're going to do with the plan. And I'm going to keep finding different ways of looking at the more practical aspects and some of the more philosophical aspects of how we put a plan together, how we break this stuff down, so that instead of you trying to build an entire plan from scratch, you can figure out which boxes you can fill and fill them in an order that makes sense for your life. Because we're all different, and I can't tell you what to do. It would just be useless advice. I can't even hardly figure out what I should be doing half the time. But by breaking this all out, we'll make it work together. It's been another edition of Calm Survival. I've been Carl, and I hope to see you next time.